Yes, hi. This is Super Dave calling again or chiming in again. Gus Gorman. Yes, August Gorman. Okay, what's that got to do with Superman? A whole lot. We are about to review, or we're reviewing my favorite of the Superman movies, Superman 3, um, starring Christopher Reeve again. He gets top billing as Superman slash Clark Kent, as well as Richard Pryor as Gus Gorman. The movie opens, and it was released on June 17th, 1983 in the US and in July 83 in other places theatrically later on. Um, Again, directed by Richard Lester from a screenplay by David and Leslie Newman. Um, the movie opens with Richard Pryor's character, Gus Gorman. He's on an unemployment line, having trouble getting a job, and somebody's trying to call me, but I'll look at that later. Trying to get a job, and basically, uh, he's run out of unemployment benefits. Well, anyway, he asks for a book of matches for a silly cigarette, and it says on the matchbook cover, become a computer programmer, and that sets off an idea in his mind. Now, Richard Lester, the director, he sets up what is arguably the silliest opening to a Superman movie. And you think, what's this got to do with Superman? But I remember laughing with laughter when I first saw it. It was really, really something, and they have all these mishaps in Metropolis. But the movie basically follows three different stories so that I don't spend too much time on plotting. Again, spoiler alert, please see the movie first. Um, Plot one is Richard Pryor's character becoming, quickly acquainted with the computers, demonstrating that he is a computer genius. And then also, we also have, he eventually gets hired, as Christopher Reeve would say, by the bad guys, and his computer wizardry is used to work for the bad guys. I'll explain more about that in a minute. Meanwhile, we have an opening scene at the Daily Planet where Jackie Cooper's Perry White is back, Mark McClure's Jimmy Olsen is back, and Lois Lane only makes a brief appearance in Superman 3 as Lois Lane. Lois Lane leaves at the beginning of the movie to go on vacation. There's a lot of backstory as to why her character was cut down. Some people say it was she had a rift with the producers. Others say no, uh, we want to explore another love interest. Clark wants to go back to his 15th high school reunion, which is in Smallville. So he goes back there and meets up with Lana Lang, played by Annette O'Toole. She was played by a different actress, Diane Sherry or something like that, in Superman 1, but he meets up with her. And what's interesting about the love story element of Superman 3 is that Lana is interested in Clark and just thinks that Superman is a nice guy, you know. So that's really interesting. Um, so their romance develops. It's not like the romance of Superman and Lois in the first two movies. It's very platonic, as a matter of fact, in many ways. But it's sweet, and I think Lana has more respect for Clark, way more than Lois does. Definitely. And in fact, I'm even going to go on record as saying I think it's the best love story of the series. Uh, could more be done with it? Sure, definitely. But I think it's the best love story in the series. Now, going back to Richard Pryor's character, um, before I get into that, I should mention Superman 3 has a lot of focus on great action, great special effects. There's a great scene in the opening where he saves a man from drowning out of a car. I always thought that was really neat. all the way they hide the wires and stuff. And then there are a couple other action sequences in Smallville. He saves a chemical plant from basically blowing up. And he takes this big sheet of ice from a nearby lake 5 miles away, Lake Ganuba or something like that, and lands it on the acid plant. Unfortunately, Jimmy Olsen gets hurt, but he'll recover. He's recovering in this movie. And then later on, Lana, we discover, has a little boy named Ricky, and there's a couple of neat sequences with him. One where Ricky's in a bowling alley and basically having trouble with the bowling, and Clark does a super sneeze and goes like that. It's just really, really funny and stuff. It's just hilarious. And then there's a serious action scene where Lana and Clark and Ricky are on a picnic, and the dog Buster is crying out, barking because Ricky had a fall, and there are these corn thresher machines that are coming toward Ricky, not seeing him properly, and Superman comes to the rescue. And I love what Lana Lang says. Nice to meet you, Superman. And this is Clark. And then Clark comes out. I found him. I found Buster. And it's great. I just love scenes like that. Meanwhile, Richard Pryor's character, how does he get hooked up with the bad guys? And I would have to say that this is one of the most clever elements of Superman 3. He's first at a data processing school. They discover that he's got great talent as a data processor. And then he starts working for Websco as an employee, and he's supposed to get $225 a week, right? But they're only giving him $143.80. How is he supposed to live on that? Paying state tax, federal tax, Social Security tax. You're getting money when you're age 65. I want to enjoy while I'm young. Get down, boogie, boogie, boogie. And his friend says, no, actually, it's probably more like $143.80 and 1/2 cent. There are always fractions left over in big corporations, but they round it down to the lowest whole number. And it's just, he gets this brilliant idea of how many sugars? 1.5. What if I take all the half cents from everybody's paycheck and put it into my paycheck? And he ends up getting $85,000 in change. Of course, he's not good at keeping his joy to himself, meaning Richard Pryor's Gus Gorman. And so, the boss, played by Robert Vaughn as Ross Webster, he sees Pryor driving around in a Ferrari, and Ross Webster, as well as his character sister, Vera Webster, played by Annie Ross, and his girlfriend, Lorelei Ambrosia, played by Pamela Stevenson, they catch wind of this. And so Richard Pryor's called up to the office, and he says, hey, the boss wants to see you. He's like, not that boss, the boss. You mean me? Why would the boss want to see me? Why would the boss want to see me? There's no reason, you see. Oh, maybe it's those suggestions for the volleyball uniforms. That's it. And then he goes, Ross the boss, Ross the boss, Ross the boss, that boss. Be calm, be cool, be collected. And Ross Webster, Robert Vaughn, says, you've been a naughty guy, haven't you? Come on, admit it now, admit it. You've been just a little bit naughty, haven't you? And he realizes that Richard Pryor can do all kinds of computer things for him that are working for the bad guys. Richard Pryor kind of innocently, not knowing that he's being blackmailed, or maybe he does know he's being blackmailed. He's asked to destroy a coffee crop so that Webster would now have complete control over all the world's coffee crops. He's also later in the movie asked to take all the oil tankers and bring them into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And of course, Pryor's like, and do what with the oil tankers? And just sit there. Well, how are all the people going to get their oil? You catch on fast, old buddy. So you got that. But the problem is Superman gets in the way of the coffee crop plan. And they got to find a way to stop Superman. And then Lorelei remembers, aha, kryptonite. She plays dumb, but really she's a smart girl. And she remembers, aha, kryptonite. Or Kryptonham or Kryptonheimer, kryptonite. Then they realize they don't have any more on Earth. But if Gus Gorman can use the Vulcan satellite and scan and grab onto the floating chunk of kryptonite, the computer analyzes the components, and the boys of the lab duplicate the stuff down here. So after an extremely irreverent scene that lacks verisimilitude, where Pryor skis off the side of a building and lands on the ground unhurt in a Superman cape, not unlike mine. He's in a pink tablecloth. He tries his best to put together the components for kryptonite, but there's an unknown element, and it's unknown. So he takes the tar from his Camel cigarettes and puts that in as an ingredient. Meanwhile, Ricky's having his birthday, and Clark, who gets to talk with Superman a lot, and I love what Lana Lang says about Clark. She said, tell everybody we think Superman is wonderful, but Clark, you're the best. And that's just so romantic. It's just so loving that people don't give this movie enough credit. They really don't. And anyway, from there, Superman and Lana and Ricky are at Ricky's birthday party. The mayor of Smallville gives Superman the key to the city. And then Richard Pryor shows up, gives a General Patton type speech, goes on and on and on. But come on, let's face it, it's funny. He's really into the character. It's really something. And Superman's just like, what's going on here? And as he hands him this green supposed gift, Superman gets a little taken aback. He's like, oh, I guess it's not hurting me after all. Now, you'd think that if he really did die on the spot and this were real kryptonite, wouldn't Gus get arrested? But the writers, for whatever reason, they don't get into that issue. So anyway, this comes up with what I believe is the best and most interesting part of Superman 3. Excuse me. And that is that slowly but surely, the kryptonite, the synthetic kryptonite, some people would call it the red kryptonite, even though it appears green, Superman becomes a bad guy. He becomes a super bum. He becomes a super jerk. Now, there are scenes in Superman 3 that I don't really think work for kids. He's there in Lana's house and he comes on to Lana. Then he's late in saving a truck falling off a bridge. I believe the guy turns out all right, but still he was late and could have prevented a real disaster from happening. From there on in, Superman becomes super jerk. He's got his powers, essentially, but he goes around doing crazy things like straightening the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And yes, I do have a Leaning Tower of Pisa in my room from my trip to Italy in 1994. Also, he'll blow out the Olympic flame. Lorelei is sitting on top of the Statue of Liberty and says, well, there's this little boat, meaning all the oil tankers they want to get. And it's not going where it's supposed to go. And he flies off and puts a big hole in the boat and the oil comes bursting out of it. And then there's a really adult scene where he gets on with Lorelei and Superman doesn't care. And then he's finally sitting there in total depression, total drunkenness in a bar in downtown Metropolis. By the way, they filmed the Metropolis exteriors in Calgary, and then they did the Smallville sequences in High River. That's all in Alberta, Canada. They did do some second unit background plates of Manhattan and New York City for the film, like they did for the others, all the others. But anyway, Superman finally has a nervous breakdown and flies to a automobile graveyard, automobile junkyard, in which I argue is the best scene in the movie. It is fantastic. Christopher Reeve plays both characters. He lands there. He goes, ah, ah, and the workers there at the auto graveyard, they're like, come on, he's gone nuts. Let's get out of here. He's gone nuts. Come on. And these two, the evil Superman and the good Clark Kent, they duke it out in a junkyard for a 10-minute sequence, 7 or 8 10-minute sequence. Brilliantly done. I believe it was the first or one of the first scenes shot for the movie in June and early July of 82. Fantastic scene. In my opinion, it saves the movie because up till then, it's mainly comedy, some good action sequences, but this is the kind of scene that puts the movie over the top and really this is refreshing. This is what we've come to see Superman be. And this is not a rip-off sequel. This is not a rip-off movie. And he finally conquers himself in the junkyard. And I just love that shot of him flying into the camera, a real wire shot. And then, he repairs the damage to the oil tanker. Meanwhile, Gus Gorman, with Ross Webster's approval, has built the supercomputer, which is kind of like a Brainiac character in the canyons of the Grand Canyon, on location in Glen Canyon, Utah. But of course, they use the 007 stage for the interior set. And I love what Richard Pryor says. I just don't believe that a man can fly. So he uses his donkey to go all the way down. And the other three villains, they take balloons down. So eventually Superman gets back to Lorelei's penthouse, the Webster penthouse, finds out where they are. And the scenes coming up, like with the missiles, they're a little bit like Superman 1 with him chasing the missiles. But this is like more comedic, more comic booky, which I'm fine with that. What I love is the Atari game where they play Superman for laughs, but they're not laughing at the character. They're still laughing with the character. There's still no winking at the camera. It's still in the world of comic book. And I think Christopher Reeve is the one who keeps the purity of that character, keeps the essence of that character. But the junkyard is really the climax of the movie. The computer fight at the end, that's more of a nice epilogue. And the computer eventually does shoot real kryptonite rays at Superman. And Richard Pryor has a change of heart and decides to save him and says, no, I've been conned. I love Superman. I'm going to save him. And, he stops the kryptonite. And in one of the movie's scariest sequences, definitely too scary for kids, Vera gets, played by Annie Ross, gets transformed into a robot and, shoots these laser beams out, and it's crazy. And then Superman finally comes in with a can of acid from the power plant that he was there earlier in the movie. And, there's the demise of the ultimate computer. This movie is about how Superman overcomes technology, can help really, rescue the problems with the commodities market. You might think commodities market, not as big of a threat, but the real threat here was Superman conquering himself. And I think that is a very, very worthy addition to this series of films, that even Superman can spend his gift if he's not careful. He reconciles with Lana Lang, Clark Kent, at the end of the movie, and gives Lana Lang a diamond ring because earlier she had to pawn her diamond ring to pay for her heating bills. And then finally, Lois Lane is back at the Daily Planet, and Lana Lang really puts Lois aback by saying, well, I couldn't believe it when Clark gave it to me. And she's like, Clark gave it to you? So there's some sadness there. We don't see Lana again in future movies. But then in another hilarious scene, Superman takes the Leaning Tower of Pisa and brings it straight up. And so I think Superman 1 and Superman 2, especially Superman 2, are greatness throughout. Versus this movie, I think it's saved by that junkyard scene. And the greatness of that scene resonates throughout the rest of the movie. You don't have a movie if you take out the junkyard scene, or you don't have an effective enough movie if you take out that junkyard scene. But with the junkyard scene, you have everything you need. Again, I must say that Richard Lester is brilliant with his direction. He, in fact, is my favorite director, even though I believe that Richard Donner deserves full credit for starting this series, along with Ilya Salkin and Peter Spengler, Alexander Salkin. Um, some people say that Lester's a little more cynical, but I do believe that Lester cares about the heart of the character. He was not a fan of comic books the way that Donner was, but I think that Lester knows knows how to have the most fun with the material. He's not afraid to challenge Superman in new and interesting and fresh ways. So there are so many wonderful things I could say about this movie. But now we're going to take a little detour and go on to Supergirl. And I'll tell you what my thoughts are on that movie in a couple of minutes on the next video. This one runs Superman 1 again runs 143 minutes. Superman 2 runs 127 minutes. Superman 3 runs 125 minutes. So let's go on to Supergirl. Thanks.